In the quiet suburban neighborhood of Pine Crest Meadows, where the houses stood in uniform perfection and the sidewalks gleamed with carefully maintained order, the holidays were usually a time of peace. Families would hang modest wreaths on their doors, a few strands of white lights glimmered here and there, and the HOA made sure nothing disrupted the carefully manicured aesthetic. But for Daniel and Clara Hartwell, December wasn't just another month. It was the most important season of the year. The Hartwells had a tradition that stretched back decades. Daniel's late father had started it when Daniel was a boy, stringing lights across their humble home until the entire block seemed brighter. After inheriting the spirit of that tradition, Daniel carried it into his adult life, and with his wife and children, he had taken it further than his father ever imagined. Their home was no longer just decorated, it was a winter wonderland. Thousands of lights draped across the roofline, glowing reindeer stood proudly on the lawn, candy cane arches lined the walkway, and a towering inflatable Santa waved cheerfully from the corner. It wasn't just for themselves. Neighbors loved it, and children squealed in delight as their parents slowed down their cars to take in the spectacle. For many, it had become a holiday pilgrimage to see the Hartwell lights. But for the HOA board, and especially its iron-fisted president, it was an abomination. One chilly morning, Daniel stepped outside to collect the paper and noticed an envelope taped to his door. The bold HOA logo stared back at him like a warning sign. Inside, the letter was filled with clipped legal phrasing. His Christmas decorations violated community guidelines, created excessive disturbance, and failed to comply with aesthetic regulations. At the bottom, the fine glared at him in heavy print. $1,000 due within 14 days. Daniel's heart sank. $1,000 for spreading holiday cheer? Clara tried to calm him, reminding him that they could appeal. Their children, Lily and Max, asked if the lights would have to come down, their eyes wide with worry. Daniel shook his head. Not yet. That night, as the lights danced across their home in perfect synchronization with the gentle music, cars lined the street, their drivers smiling, some even rolling down their windows to shout their thanks. Daniel watched them, his anger solidifying into resolve. He realized the HOA had made a mistake. This wasn't just about decorations. It was about community spirit, tradition, and standing up against small-minded control. If they thought he would roll over and quietly pay the fine, they didn't know who they were dealing with. And this was only the beginning. The days that followed revealed just how relentless the HOA could be. Not content with issuing the $1,000 fine, they began their campaign of harassment. Daniel received daily letters citing supposed violations, light pollution, obstruction of common view, unauthorized inflatables. Each notice came with threats of additional fines and warnings of escalating penalties, including legal action. It became obvious the board was targeting him specifically. Neighbors had modest light displays too, but none of them received so much as a warning. It wasn't about decorations, it was personal. The HOA president, Margaret Fletcher, a woman notorious for her rigid obsession with rules, had decided that Daniel's joy-filled home didn't belong in her carefully curated neighborhood. Some neighbors whispered apologies, afraid of crossing Margaret. Others rallied quietly, stopping by to encourage Daniel and promising to support him if things escalated. But even with their words of kindness, Daniel felt the pressure mounting. Each day he found himself glancing nervously at the mailbox, half dreading what new accusation would arrive. Clara reminded him that the holidays were supposed to be about joy, not stress. But Daniel knew he couldn't simply back down. One evening, he found another envelope. This one wasn't a fine. It was an ultimatum. If he did not remove all decorations by Christmas Eve, the HOA would pursue legal action to force compliance and recover damages. For a brief moment, Daniel considered giving in. Was it worth the stress, the potential legal costs? But then he looked around at his children's glowing faces as they watched the lights dance in the yard. He remembered his father, stringing lights by hand with frozen fingers, teaching him that traditions matter, that joy matters, even when the world tries to take it away. No, Daniel thought, they will not win. And from that moment, the plan for revenge began to take shape. Daniel wasn't the kind of man to start fights, but he believed in finishing them. If the HOA wanted to make his lights the center of a battle, then he would use those lights to fight back. He began researching every HOA bylaw, scouring through the dense legal language to find loopholes. To his surprise, he discovered that while the board claimed authority over decorations, there were no explicit restrictions on temporary seasonal displays. The rules were vague enough to be challenged. He also found inconsistencies in how the HOA enforced their rules: favoritism toward certain board members, arbitrary punishments against others. If push came to shove, he could expose them. But Daniel wanted more than just a legal technicality. He wanted to turn their attempt to crush his spirit into a spectacle so large, so unforgettable, that the HOA would regret ever picking this fight. So he called in reinforcements. His brother-in-law was an electrician with a flair for over-the-top displays. Friends from church donated extra lights. Neighbors quietly slipped him inflatables, extension cords, and even a fog machine. Clara, supportive but cautious, helped map out the design, while Lily and Max giggled as they imagined how amazed people would be. Daniel's idea was simple. If the HOA thought his current display was too much, they hadn't seen anything. He was going to build the most outrageous, dazzling, jaw-dropping Christmas display Pinecrest Meadows had ever witnessed. One that would draw crowds, attract news crews, and make it impossible for the HOA to hide their pettiness. By mid-December, the Hartwell house was already attracting more cars than usual. But Daniel wasn't finished. He had timed everything to peak on Christmas Eve, the very deadline the HOA had given him. Margaret Fletcher and her board sent yet another letter, threatening immediate legal filing if the decorations weren't removed. Daniel smiled as he crumpled the paper and tossed it aside. They had no idea what was coming. Word spread quietly through the neighborhood. Friends told friends, who told coworkers, and soon anticipation built. Something big was happening at the Hartwell home, and people didn't want to miss it. On Christmas Eve, as twilight fell, cars lined the streets for blocks. Families bundled in scarves and gloves gathered on sidewalks, murmuring with excitement. Children's eyes widened as the house stood dark, waiting. Daniel stood by the control box, his heart pounding. Clara squeezed his hand. Then, with a flick of a switch, the entire property erupted into light. Thousands of bulbs ignited in perfect synchronization, choreographed to booming holiday music. Santa waved from his inflatable throne, reindeer galloped across the lawn in glowing arcs, candy canes pulsed in rhythm with the beat. Snow machines puffed flurries into the air, while a massive projection on the garage displayed holiday animations. It was dazzling, overwhelming, and utterly spectacular. The crowd erupted into cheers. Phones shot into the air, capturing every second. Social media lit up with photos and videos, hashtags spreading like wildfire. Local news vans appeared, their cameras capturing the scene, reporters marveling at the Christmas house, drawing record crowds. Margaret Fletcher stood at the end of the street, fuming, her face red with fury. She shouted into her phone, gesturing wildly at the spectacle, but it was too late. Daniel's revenge was complete. The HOA's threats looked petty now, their attempt to crush one family's joy overshadowed, literally, by the glowing lights of defiance. But the fallout was only just beginning. The next morning, Daniel's phone buzzed nonstop. Reporters wanted interviews, neighbors sent congratulations, and even strangers thanked him for bringing joy in difficult times. Videos of the display had gone viral, shared across platforms, racking up millions of views overnight. Meanwhile, the HOA was drowning in backlash. Emails poured into their office, calling them Grinches, Scrooges, and worse. Margaret Fletcher became the unwilling face of holiday hatred, her name trending locally as people mocked her attempt to shut down Christmas cheer. The board scrambled to contain the disaster, but the damage was done. Homeowners began questioning other decisions the HOA had made. Why were some residents fined for minor infractions while others were allowed to bend the rules? Why did Margaret have so much unchecked power? Daniel, carefully and methodically, released his findings to the community. Evidence of favoritism, inconsistencies, and financial mismanagement. What started as a battle over Christmas lights exploded into a full-blown revolt against the HOA leadership. Within weeks, Margaret and several board members were forced to resign. A new election was called, and the residents of Pinecrest Meadows voted in a fresh slate of leaders who promised transparency and fairness. And at the center of it all was Daniel, the man who turned Christmas lights into a revolution. As January rolled in and the lights finally came down, the Hartwell family sat together, reflecting on the whirlwind of the past month. What had started as a cruel attempt to punish them for spreading joy had turned into something much bigger. They hadn't just defended their home, they had changed their community. Neighbors who once lived in quiet fear of the HOA now felt empowered. Families decorated their homes more freely, no longer worrying about arbitrary fines. The new board encouraged community gatherings, turning Pinecrest Meadows into a place where people wanted to live, not just endure. For Daniel, the victory wasn't about going viral or humiliating Margaret Fletcher. It was about protecting something sacred, the right to celebrate, to create memories, to carry on traditions. His children would grow up remembering not the stress of that Christmas, but the magic of standing up for what mattered. And every December after, as the first strands of lights went up, the neighbors would smile knowingly. The story of the year the HOA tried to crush Christmas and how one family fought back became legend. The house may have gone dark in January, but the light of that victory never faded. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't just winning, it's shining so brightly that no one can ever forget.